Well, thank you everyone for being here. I can't tell you how much of an honor it is to be standing in front of you all today and to have some of my most important people in the room. And when Patrick says I did this at warp speed, it was by the grace of my committee. So thank you so much for allowing me to move quickly through this, because I do feel that the work is really important and that it's work that will serve the greater community and yoga, hopefully, as a whole. So the title of my dissertation is Yoga as Personal Mythology, Blending Psychology, Mythology, and the Wisdom of East and West to Heal the American Psyche. Right now, yoga is far more powerful than it is being given credit for. It is primarily a physical practice right now, but the benefits reach far beyond the body and mind. This dissertation is based on a single premise, that yoga is very powerful, but currently incomplete practice that must be augmented and evolved in order to deliver on its great promise of psycho-spiritual wholeness or enlightenment. So as Patrick explained briefly, this is what's called a production dissertation. So there is a theoretical and a production component. The production component is a manuscript for a popular book. It is a guide to a revisioned yoga practice meant to lead people on a journey of integration and wholeness on a psycho-spiritual level. The theoretical component pulls from the diverse academic background of my mythological studies here at Pacifica, as well as my years of experience teaching and practicing yoga. It highlights the modern-day yoga practice and covers what needs to be added in order to make it a more integrated experience for practitioners. It reveals the academic insights into what goes into the production piece. Many believe yoga to be a silver bullet, but it's not. It could be if we use modern knowledge and practices aligned with the traditional experience to move it forward and make it into something that integrates the Western psyche. While yoga is touted for its healing benefits, there are many ways in which healing could be optimized if some of the following issues are addressed. The current yoga model is incomplete, it is overly commercialized, and the toll of this is staggering. Diverse populations resist participation. Yoga companies take advantage of the practice to sell their products. The current practice tends to reinforce the ego by celebrating physical triumphs, particularly on social media, when the culture is filled with pictures of very thin, very flexible, primarily Caucasian women. We miss an opportunity to create a healthy and integrated psycho-spiritual state for these practitioners. When modern practice evokes complexes and the shadow side of the psyche, most contemporary teachers are not currently trained or accredited in psychology or counseling. So these practitioners don't have the tools to resolve these issues on their own, and the teachers don't yet have the tools to help them. Practitioners can use yoga as a form of escapism. When these shadow elements come up, rather than addressing them, they further repress them, causing more problems. And so many practitioners are left bereft of any psychological resolution. Many people today are at a spiritual crossroads. There's a decline of religious affiliation and an increase in those who describe themselves as unaffiliated with religion altogether. For many, yoga substitutes their religious practice. People go to yoga instead of a synagogue, a mosque, a church, or other place of worship. But right now, yoga does not fulfill the religious or spiritual needs of the psyche, but it could. In its fullness, yoga can fulfill the spiritual needs, but as it is presented currently, it looks more like the science that we favor. The West imported yoga in a way that it accepts, a concretized physical methodology with an air of spirituality. This fails to acknowledge the spiritual potential of the practice, which is personal, internal, and unprovable. Yoga developed in the East for millennia and so it speaks to the Eastern mind in a symbiotic and seamless way. The Easterner easily considers the mind and body as a whole, whereas the Westerner, since the time of Descartes, has developed a split between mind and body such that practices meant to affect both are either questioned or rejected. For example, the term asana now means the practice of more acrobatic physical postures. It originally meant the seat for meditation. But people feel differently as a result of asana practice. We know there is stress reduction, it alleviates depression and anxiety. The Western practitioner, however, is not equipped to deal with the underlying psychological and spiritual changes that asana might facilitate. These changes are either repressed, explained away, or result in practitioners who adapt to their new conditions through escapism, or by becoming what they wrongly think a yoga practitioner should be, thus perpetuating the current stereotypes, such as stretchy pants, drinking green juice, hyperflexibility. Advertising picks up on these stereotypes and gives people an idea of the ideal yoga practitioner, which creates a vicious cycle and an inaccurate yoga model. Social media and the community also serve to perpetuate this current image. And really, in the community, no one talks about the shadow or the psychological challenges. I know, Roxy, it's frustrating. Or the psychological challenges that lurk underneath the surface. So the problem here is really twofold. First, the current yoga model is overly focused on the physical and driven by an inaccurate view of what yoga is through marketing and the commodification of yoga. And secondly, the current yoga model leaves out the elements of the yoga practice that actually do address the psychological and spiritual needs of the practitioner, including ritual, mythology, and to a large degree, meditation. In order to resolve these issues and recreate yoga as something that brings psychological and spiritual wholeness, it must be elevated to the level of personal mythology. To do this, we need to revision it and think outside the box. The development of a personal mythology is a necessity for the present day in order to have a place to connect with oneself, one's purpose, and the meaning of one's life, as well as with other like-minded individuals and community. The components of a functional personal mythology include a structure for personal development, a system of holistic belief which derives from symbols and archetypes most alive in the individual, personal rituals, and a moral code. A personal mythology allows the individual to navigate psycho-spiritual integration. Western society focuses on the individual, and it is through the individual that society as a whole is integrated. Unlike the East, the West promotes and develops individualism. So a one-size-fits-all method does not work. Organized religion falters on this point in the West as people seek self-development, self-help, and self-realization. As a result, the clearest method for psycho-spiritual integration is one that occurs on an individual level and speaks to the archetypal, symbolic, and mythological contents of the individual. But personal myth does not emerge in a vacuum. People need the structural template from which to craft and build a myth, as well as an understanding of the critical importance of personal myth. Luckily, the work of both Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell aid in understanding what comprises a proper template. While Jung provides the framework for psychological transformation, Campbell presents the role of the hero's journey in personal transformation. As Campbell outlines thoroughly in his work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, the hero's journey appears to be an outward experience, though fundamentally it is inward. The steps of the cycle are helpful in understanding the process of a psycho-spiritual evolution through myth. Using this template to craft a yoga practice that catalyzes inner change creates one that is both thorough and complete. By following the cycle to the end, a complete personal myth that takes an individual from a starting place to a place of profound transformation is possible. The end goal of yoga as a personal mythology is the psycho-spiritual state of yoga, enlightenment, or individuation, complete psychological and spiritual synthesis. This is not only possible when yoga is crafted and followed as a personal mythology, It completes the picture of yoga for modern practitioners and gives them a way to navigate the current cultural paradigm with ultimate success. The components of yoga as personal mythology include psychology, which is the integration of the conscious with the unconscious, and it provides the roadmap for a stronger connection between the conscious and the unconscious. The hero's journey, which provides the steps of both inner and outer transformation. Alchemy, which links the esoteric principles of yoga with a Western model that is both seamless and completely congruent. Ritual, which allows the practitioner to create a sacred space within their own body. Personal ritual includes asana practice, but it must have a directed, conscious outcome to elevate the practice beyond merely the physical movements. The components of ritual and the complete personal myth does this. Mythology. This is the first time in human history that we have people living without an inherent collective myth. Yogic myth fills the missing pieces for practitioners and gives them an opportunity to work with the power of myth in their practice. They'll use it until they find their own or reconnect with their original myth if they had one. Myth also helps to strengthen the dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious mind. Today we seem to lack our own myths, and we have turned away from them. The challenge is that many people turn toward yoga for those answers. Modern yoga has largely attempted to strip historical yoga of its rich philosophical underpinnings and its association with the mythology of Hinduism. Whether it's because Hinduism is a foreign religion or because of the fear of crossing spiritual boundaries, for example, when yoga is taught in public schools, this sterilization of yoga denies it the richness and effectiveness it otherwise possesses. This is particularly problematic because contemporary practitioners do not bring, generally, their own religion or myth with them to the practice. Meditation teacher Eknatheswaran said that yogic myth has the genius to cloak the infinite in human form. While he was referring to the related myths of Hinduism, he was looking at them through a yogic lens, which makes that statement true. While the strict philosophical practice of yoga is easily employed by those who favor any religion, it has for thousands of years developed in the mythological context of Hinduism, and so it speaks seamlessly to those of that particular faith, as it often uses similar words, references, and concepts. For example, the mantra Om Namah Shivaya is an ancient Hindu mantra invoking Shiva, but for the yogi, Shiva signifies one's own highest self. Another challenge to the historical understanding of yoga's goal and processes is the spiritual element. What is it exactly? The Yoga Sutra defines yoga as primarily a psychological event, saying that yoga occurs with the cessations of the fluctuations of the mind. A later development in the definition of yoga is as the union of the self, or the soul, known as the Atman, and the source, known as the Brahman. So whether viewed as this psychological state or this more spiritual, soulful connection to the source, or whether viewed as Kaivalya, freedom, moksha, liberation, or samadhi, as the same as the highest, yoga results in a transformed or perhaps transcendent psycho-spiritual state, combining the words psychology and spirituality there. The key to solving this riddle for the modern practitioner who is not Hindu, who may have no connection with a mythology, and who understands more about the psyche, lies in a notion found within the text of the Yoga Sutra, and this principle is Ishvara. There is a happy medium in the concept of Ishvara between past and present. Ishvara is the notion of a personal, mythic image. It allows modern-day practitioners to utilize psychological tools to access their own unconscious and discover their own form of Ishvara, their mythic image, from amongst the archetypes present and alive within their own psyche. This requires establishing a dialogue between conscious and unconscious so the practitioner may dredge up an archetypal image from within upon which to build their own personal mythology. In the production component of the dissertation, I outline a specific practice of Yoga Nidra in order to help people move deeply within their unconscious and recover their mythic image. The next component is ritual. Broadly defined, ritual, very broadly defined by the way, ritual is the physical component of a spiritual practice. It is the physical embodiment of a mythology. Yoga has incorporated ritual practices throughout its long history, and it is easily arguable that ritual, mantra, and meditation are the most long-standing practices of yoga. Nowadays, the primary practice of practitioners is asana, postures, and while the physical benefits are widely cited, it is perhaps the ritualistic benefits that are the most potent. Many overlook this important intertwining of the physical with the philosophical and spiritual, thinking it's only the physical movements that bring about the greatest benefits of yoga. This is not so. Through the modern asana practice, students create a sacredness within themselves, an experience as sanctified not only the space in which they practice, but also their own existence. The yoga practice, the asana practice, allows for the manifestation of the sacred within them. What if modern practitioners are empowered to engage in a yoga-based ritual for the benefit of an improved state of mind as a part of the development of their complete yoga practice? We would then have a body of practitioners actively engaging in embodying their myth and catalyzing psycho-spiritual transformation. This is particularly important in a climate where the abandonment of religious traditions is common, and rites of passage are either no longer practiced or not taken seriously. As students enact the ritual form of asana, they have the potential to manifest the sacred within them. As a result, they attain an elevated state of mind known as chitta prasaranam. This is the fertile ground from which the psycho-spiritual state of yoga arises. Giving practitioners clear guides and cues on how to build personalized rituals enables them to create a ritualistic tradition that is uniquely their own. In turn, this personalized ritual ushers them across their own sacred threshold into the next mode of being as complete and whole individuals. A yoga practice facilitates transformation on every level: physical, through the ritual of asana; physiological, via conscious breathing; emotional, psychological, and spiritual. These final three levels mentioned are addressed through the intelligent addition of practices to the current yoga model, including the addition of alchemy to the energetic principles of the chakras. There is a definite connection within the esoteric understanding of yoga's energetic principles and alchemy's psychological principles. The goal of each is a purified, perfected union of opposites. Both alchemy and yoga recognize the spiritual and psychological components of physical matter. Just as the alchemist submits the base material, prima materia, to the alchemical process to bring about the proverbial gold, the practitioner of yoga does the same, particularly in the practice of Hatha yoga. The Hatha yoga practitioner uses the substrate of the physical body as the primary tool for refining and transforming consciousness. Essentially, the body of the yoga practitioner becomes the alembic, or the container, for the alchemical process resulting in the psycho-spiritual marriage of the internal sun and moon, the conscious and unconscious, respectively. The journey of the yogi alchemist is made through the chakra system. It begins with the process of nigredo, digging deeply into the area of consciousness to find the darkness hidden there. Then the albedo is the washing or the whitening process that occurs as we work that psycho-spiritual material over. Finally, the rubedo is the reddening or the glow that is revealed when we have mined the darkness for our own inner gold. This is a constant cyclical process that occurs at every level of consciousness. Each chakra provides the opportunity for more self-discovery, so that we begin to understand in the vein of the alchemical principle that as above, so below. In this process, one has successfully bridged East and West, used Western tools to bolster Eastern practices, and the result is not just the perfect alchemical marriage within the yoga practitioner, but the grand opus of the yoga practice itself, which is enlightenment. As the yoga practitioner utilizes the alchemy of yoga for the constant cyclical transformation of the psyche and continues on the path of yoga, he or she ultimately finds him or herself on the arc of a much grander journey, more comparable to that of the hero's journey. While Campbell states that myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into the human cultural manifestation, this sentiment becomes narrowed with regard to personal mythology. When applied to the individual, personal myths become the opening through which the inexhaustible psychic energies pour into the life of the person. The yogi initiates the hero's journey with a new studio membership and the use of Sanskrit words like namaste. Just as the hero must eventually slay dragons, the yogi gains increasingly deeper processes of transformation through various yoga practices as outlined here. With the application of the alchemy of yoga through ritual, mantra, asana, meditation, invocation, and the ability to connect with the psycho-spiritual state of yoga, the yoga practitioner moves through the dark forest of the internal landscape, just as the hero moves through the dark forest of the external landscape. For the yoga practitioner, the final stage of the journey is the release of the attachment to the ego, the moment of individuation, where conscious and unconscious are unified in the state of enlightenment, the psycho-spiritual state of yoga. The role of the modern guru. Though the production portion of this dissertation is a manuscript for a popular book, which teaches readers the framework of personal mythology and gives instruction as to how to follow its path, the reality is that most people need a mentor or a teacher or a guide to move through these processes effectively. Most people begin yoga practice by learning from a teacher. And in fact, this relationship is precisely how the wisdom of yoga has carried down through the ages. Through what must have been an unbroken lineage of disciple and master, the teachings of yoga survived. What must change in this modern day is the role of the teacher. Today, the average teacher has a meager 200 hours of training in the physical discipline of yoga, often with little instruction in the higher aim of yoga as a psycho-spiritual state. Among the many challenges presented by the modern yoga model, the yoga instructor has an almost non-existent support structure for the psycho-spiritual application, practice, and realization of yoga. When one is identified as a yoga instructor today, it is assumed that one is essentially a kind of calisthenics teacher with ultra flexibility and the ability to teach a modern asana practice. In the evolution of the modern yoga model, it is critical that the leadership role be reassessed and bolstered in accordance with the research and assertions made here today. For if students of yoga are to reach a state of psycho-spiritual enlightenment, they absolutely need qualified guides to assist them in that process. Without the proper education and accreditation, yoga instructors are not equipped to fully support a student's progress toward the psycho-spiritual state of yoga. Aside from lacking training in psychological principles, counseling methods, or analytical tools, because modern yoga does not emphasize the spiritual elements of the practice, they are also not likely to have an experience of the state of yoga, which is the historical fundamental requirement of a guru or yoga teacher. Though, as we evolve today's yoga instructor with the development of an accredited course that prepares them with the necessary therapeutic tools of counseling and psychology, we must take into account the differences between the historical tradition of the teacher and its best application for today's Western practitioner. To place someone on a pedestal as a guru is problematic, and it's a problematic affair for the Western practitioner, whose fundamental psychic makeup is to assert individualism, learn through questioning others, and challenge the status quo. It may be best to consider the other role of the guru, not as divine guide, but as spiritual counselor, a role held similarly by clergy members of various faiths, but a role that is severely diminished today. In the absence of effective spiritual counseling, psychology has tried to fill the void, but it does not necessarily deliver on the spiritual aspect of the equation. Perhaps this is a role that is best filled by a yoga professional, one trained in proper methods of counseling, accredited and educated in psychology principles, as well as in yoga psychology, philosophy, and practice. In order to make the current yoga model complete, a new role for the yoga professional must be created and established: the counselor in yoga psychology. When the new model of yoga is presented to the public, it is expected to inspire a shift in the landscape of the community, the industry, and most importantly, the individual. The changes will ultimately be beneficial. Initially, it is expected that many in the yoga community may balk at the revelation that yoga is a psycho-spiritual practice, because it is contrary to the current belief that yoga is primarily a physical practice. Another challenge is the general mistrust of myth. Today, we don't really trust our own mythic imagination. And in fact, anytime mythological fantasies erupt in a person's life, it's a psychological problem of the first degree. It's worthwhile to overcome people's understanding of the word myth as false and encourage them to take steps toward discovering their own true and personal myth through a yoga practice. Sharing the sacred stories of the Hindu tradition that intrigue people and link to their beloved asana practice is instrumental in this process. It helps to see the value of myth, as well as the value of seeing past the myth to the underlying archetypal truth. As for the yoga professionals, with the development of an accredited program in counseling and yoga psychology, teachers are armed with the knowledge and skills to further the progress of the independent students. They are empowered professionally and financially with an accredited degree of higher value than a meager 200-hour teacher training certificate. Similar to the way that the analyst might use the tools of depth psychology to facilitate individuation, the counselor in yoga psychology would use the tools of modern yoga practice to facilitate the psychospiritual state of yoga. The most profound shift as a result of this new model for yoga lies with the individual. No longer are individual yoga practitioners reliant on studios, classes, or teachers to embark on their yoga practice. They have the knowledge, the tools, and the techniques to develop a practice on their own, one that extends beyond asana and is fueled by their own psychological, spiritual, emotional, and physical needs. No longer do they need to look outward for a skewed definition of how yoga should be practiced or what a yoga practitioner should look like. Rather, they are empowered to look within, to know that they are indeed yogis, responsible for their practice, and that their practice sustains them through their external conditions of life. More than a lofty idea for a revolution in both yoga and personal myth, this dissertation contains practical tools, experiential evidence, and a conglomeration of wisdom from East and West to initiate the psycho-spiritual healing of the modern Western yoga practitioner. While this is a noble endeavor, it is a fool's errand if it is not followed up with the work and education put forth in the entirety of this work. The path has been paved with the popularity of yoga in the West and the drying up of the collective myth. The ground is fertile for the development of something, and it is hoped that the work contained herein fills that void. If not within the collective of the yoga community, then within the individual psyche of those who take on the work for themselves.